The way that you speak about ordinals, it seems to be through a different lens than most of the other regular commentators. It feels like this dense understanding of mining and how it pertains to ordinals. Where does that knowledge and kind of confidence come from?
That's a really good question. I've been in Bitcoin for forever. I run a Bitcoin only meetup in my hometown for about half a decade now. I actually come from the world of energy. I and my partners have been deploying off-grid Bitcoin mines in Oklahoma for quite some time now. I've been focused on Bitcoin mining more on the operations side for several years, but I've always had a love for how Bitcoin works. I mean, the narratives, the technical side of it, the whys of everything. I am one who actually looks out across all of crypto and digital assets. I come from that perspective, and I've always been kind of, I call it heterodox. I advocate for Bitcoin, but I leave a lot of open for experimentation, and I'm agnostic about other blockchains as opposed to hateful of them.
I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite some time. Charlie probably doesn't know this, but I think this is actually the first time we've actually been able to talk, one-on-one. We've been in many spaces together over the last 6-7 months, and you've been growing at an incredible rate. Not only your persona, but the type of information that you put out there. I'm an active listener for your weekly roundup, and also you and Cypher's kind of deep dives so that you could teach me, a no-coder, on how all the mechanics of this crazy stuff actually works. So I appreciate you for coming on, man. I'm excited for this.
For sure, Jake. It's funny, you were there early on, and I've always known, I said this earlier, I've known your Twitter avatar. I was like, oh, that Jake guy, he passes the vibe check, or the online vibe check. So it's good to see you in person. And during an Ordinals bear market, if you will, a lot of the kind of noise recedes, and we finally get to have the conversations we've been wanting to have. Normally I'd be at my computer back in Oklahoma, but I am on the road. I'm actually in Nashville, Tennessee at Bitcoin purist mecca here. It's called Bitcoin Park. So I'm upstairs. It's a really cool co-working space. I love this place, but it's kind of funny to be talking about ordinals in this particular venue. So yeah, just happy to be here.
And from my understanding too, the Bitcoin conference is also moving to Nashville or to Tennessee as well. So I guess everyone's getting their roots, leaving Miami and going up a little bit north.
It is, yeah. I'm happy. Miami's way too goddamn hot. Nashville, we actually own a condo here, so I have a place to stay and crash. And also BTC Mag, or BTC Media, the parent company of the conference, has a lot of operations here. So it's a natural fit. I like it.
Yeah, hopefully you're pitching the ways of ordinals. We could just start this, just right from the beginning, just a traditional sense. I do want to say this too before we start. The way that you speak about ordinals, it seems to be through a different lens than most of the other regular commentators, whether it's Leo or Tio or anybody. It feels like this dense understanding of mining and how it pertains to ordinals, where for a while it felt like miners were kind of very dismissive towards ordinals, I guess, until they got those paychecks. And then they're like, hey, this is kind of the way to go. But the way that you see it, it brings a lot of insight to how I view it outside of just, the Ord influencers kind of perspective, or those who think ordinals are dead. So where does that knowledge and kind of confidence come from?
That's a really good question. We could touch upon a lot of things, Bitcoin culture, Bitcoin mining, all that. I've been in Bitcoin for forever. I've been I run a Bitcoin only meetup in my hometown for about half a decade now. And I actually come from the world of energy. So I and my partners have been deploying off-grid Bitcoin mines in Oklahoma for quite some time now. So I've been focused on Bitcoin mining more on the operations side for several years, but I've always had a love for how Bitcoin works. I mean, the narratives, the technical side of it, the whys of everything. And I also am one of the few Bitcoiners, I think, who actually looks out across all of crypto and digital assets. And I find a lot of this stuff very interesting. And I find I find a lot of the people who use these networks, I want those people to use Bitcoin. And so I come from that perspective, and I've always been kind of, I call it heterodox. I advocate for Bitcoin, but I leave a lot of open for experimentation, and I'm agnostic about other blockchains as opposed to hateful of them. So here I am, I'm sitting on my hands in, last winter, and I'm we're not going to build another Bitcoin mine in the next few months, maybe taking my first vacation in a while. And I found myself hanging out with Casey on Discord, and the rest is history. So it's weird because I've dabbled in NFTs before, and I have a lot of interest and focus on what I call the business of block production. That is how Bitcoin blocks are produced. And so that led me to joining Luxor, which is one of the largest Bitcoin mining pools in North America and has a history of deep innovation across the Bitcoin mining tech stack. And that is kind of why I think I have this insight, which is a little bit different than your NFT degen, which again, near and dear to my heart, the degenerates, but I'm not in here for a quick flip. I want to build something, and sometimes the price is irrelevant to me. So in this case, I want to talk about how ordinals affect Bitcoin, and then I think they have deeper implications. Casey kind of opened up like a Pandora's box, and it's creating a lot of very interesting knockoff effects. That's kind of just like why I view things the way I do.
Yeah, the simple, the simple Pandora's box is that also is now being opened up on other proof of work chains like Litecoins and Dogecoin, and I think they've even tried it on Monero, and you could probably go down the board to the old school ones like Vercoin and stuff like that. It's interesting that you've came from the energy background. For a long time, when I got into Bitcoin back in 2016, it took me a little bit to realize it, but I kind of saw Bitcoin more as kind of this idea of energy innovation than it was more of like a monetary unit. What is like your philosophical views on Bitcoin? Is it something like Michael Saylor would say it's digital property, for the future? Is it something in terms of a more pure gold or gold 2.0? Yeah, give us some insight. I'm very interested.
That's a great question. And I mentioned I'm kind of a Bitcoin heterodox, and I kind of have a bunch of different views, and I don't fit into a box with my view on Bitcoin. So I think the Michael Saylor narrative is very strong. It really resonates with a lot of people, but I'll say that is fairly recent. That view is really like post block size war. Bitcoin was kind of this cypherpunk tech for the first half decade. And then the block size war happened, which kind of sucked all the air out of the room. And I found myself there thinking that I thought I knew what Bitcoin was. And the block size war really taught me that I didn't. And that's what got me into Bitcoin mining. And I would say my views on Bitcoin now are kind of, I have in my Twitter bio Bitcoin accelerationist, in that I think there's a future where Bitcoin is much deeper integrated across everything. And yes, a lot of that is energy, but I think it goes well beyond that. And so I've actually been using this kind of language and this analogy where, the Bitcoiner, the hardcore Bitcoiners really get the money is energy narrative. And I think that works. I would say this: energy and money have had distinct networks in how they operate and interrelate over the long course of human history. But why limit Bitcoin to those things? Energy and money are two consensus mechanisms that deal with the physical and social world. But then also you have a whole third thing of information. And this information network have been, passed down through human generations, through word and written thought, and through tradition. And these things are consensus mechanisms for humans which have operated separately. And in Bitcoin, they are convergent. So I look and I say, Bitcoin is energy and it's money, and it is also information, and might have other properties. And so I look at inscriptions and I say, yeah, they might be JPEGs now, but it has deep implications for putting things on Bitcoin, because Bitcoin unifies all these into one network as opposed to discrete networks. And so that's why I get really excited about cool shit like numbering Satoshis and putting information on, putting data in Bitcoin's witness data. And so I think we're 14 years into this young experiment of a thing we call Bitcoin. And so I think so little has been written, and that is why I take a very open mind to new ideas. So that's kind of what I think about Bitcoin.
Yeah, I guess if you think just kind of today, if Bitcoin didn't exist, the best comparison to energy and monetary unit would kind of be something like the petrodollar, right? Where you have kind of this proof of work to extract the oil, and then you pair it to the amount of dollars. But Bitcoin kind of, merges both of those together in a way that it's just one unit instead of having, a lot of congestion to kind of get to that method.
Yeah, I come from energy, specifically oil and gas. My family has a half century in oil and gas, specifically on the market research side. So I deploy Bitcoin mines into the oil field, we do some of that we call like flare methane mitigation, which is great because I don't want flaring and I don't want methane and I want my Bitcoin. So it works perfectly. But the petrodollar is a great example because there's way more analogies between oil and gas and Bitcoin than a lot of people realize until you actually start having to talk to the oil field folks, because these are right now kind of like commodities, but it's very deeply related to money. And I look at Bitcoin and I see you can have just a simple capitalist perspective in that you produce a commodity with no carrier transport costs anywhere in the world, unbound by human borders, country borders. But then also I don't want to go invade and occupy other nations. I don't want to be in, Libya. I don't want to be in Afghanistan. I don't think it's good that we spend our time there. And I think Bitcoin lets us focus internally and say, how can we leverage the existing energy infrastructure and energy capabilities we as countries around the world have? And I think it unlocks a lot of things which emerging markets, specifically third world countries, have in spades. Third world countries are very resource rich, but they've kind of they've been under the thumb of the Western nations for a long time. I don't want to take that off the rails, but yeah, I mean, you brought up the petrodollar, so I have to say it.
Hey, I mean, that's the way that energy is migrating now towards, being more clean, quote unquote. You even have, one of our mutual friends, Zach, over at CleanSpark, they're kind of just built on this whole green energy. But from the realist perspective, I think the majority of those, and you probably have even a more firm understanding of this, is that to move to a fully clean source of energy is going to take a lot longer than people would like it to be. So it's just all in mitigation.
I would say I'm an energy realist, and I also think that Bitcoin unlocks all types of energy innovation, clean energy, aggregate more energy production. I like to say that energy is not scarce. What is scarce is our ability to leverage energy the right way. So I look at what Zach's doing with CleanSpark, and I really applaud that because it checks all the boxes. It's a company who's mining Bitcoin really efficiently, and a company that is mining Bitcoin really responsibly. So I like what they're doing over there at that company.
So at what point in time then did you make the transition from energy to Bitcoin mining pools or mining? Did you set up the hardware first to just say, hey, let me give this a try? Or did you enter through the software side of going through the pool first and then eventually putting up your own rigs?
Yeah, I come from the market research side of Bitcoin. So I'll go and I'll get my hands dirty turning a wrench at, a gas well or something on occasion. But I'm not really like that kind of guy. I'm more of like a big picture. How do the markets work? But I think we kind of forget that it wasn't so clear that Bitcoin mining was interlinked to energy for the longest time. And I actually thought, I thought for years I would love to work in Bitcoin, but I'm not really a developer first. How do I do this? Unfortunately, I'm familiar with oil and gas. That'll never cross paths. But then 2016 and 2017 rolled around as the block size war heated up and then the Bitcoin Cash fork. And that forced me to really understand what mining was and how it's deeply interlinked with energy production. And then in my own little corner of the world, there's abundant gas, which is wasted or underpriced. And so it's a simple concept of acquiring that, leveraging that to power Bitcoin mines. And that's what my partners and I did here in Oklahoma for a few years. And so I'm the guy of the partners who's least focused on operations and more focused on how Bitcoin works. And through that, I had correspondence and familiarity with this small upstart team called Luxor Tech. And I love these guys because they produce like killer market research. And I was like, they wrote the Bible basically on like hash price and like mining tracking industry metrics. And so I followed them. They launched the Bitcoin pool only like 2 years ago. And so I've known a lot of the folks over there. And it's very poetic that I happen to be hanging out on Discord and Nick, CEO of Luxor, builds the Taproot Wizard block, puts it on there. I was like, oh shit, nice. Because Nick and I are talking about this. For some reason, we were talking about Ordinals at the time. And I was like, oh, this is cool. This is like a shot across the bow for Bitcoin miners that this kind of thing matters for you. And maybe not for the miner who builds the container and runs the computers themselves, but that miner uses a Bitcoin mining pool. And this is really where it gets very interesting because the mining pool is the actual entity that produces the blocks. And that's where it gets really interesting and technical because you have to do weird things to put, your giant JPEGs in blocks. But what if they're not JPEGs? What if it's other types of information? what does this affect like the financial markets of block space? A lot of people new to Bitcoin, especially to Ordinals, are learning about like UTXOs and non-standard transactions and taproot addresses. And there's a lot of interesting problems with which Bitcoiners have talked about for a long time. Like, how are we going to solve all these UTXOs at dust limit in a high fee environment? And the thing is, there's not been a lot of good solutions proposed. But in the past 6 months, when more people are talking about it and looking at this challenge, just because of ordinals and because we now actually have these more interesting dynamics in block space, some solutions and proposals are kind of floating around, and we're talking about that internally at Luxor. How do we bring more creativity to the way that the Bitcoin blockchain looks? Bitcoin has these consensus rules and we got to operate within that, but like we've barely explored the edges. Just looking at ordinals simply, you look and say, well, I mean, people thought NFTs couldn't be on Bitcoin for the past 5 years. This was a given. And now it's like we just brainhold that. We just forgot that there was like ever a conversation. And we're like, okay, well, we can put NFT-like things. We're going to call them inscriptions, and they're going to have certain qualities which are superior. But like, what else can Bitcoin do that we thought it couldn't do? And maybe it can't do everything, but maybe it can do a lot more than we've given it credit for. And really, just bringing fresh blood to Bitcoin. I mentioned, there's a cultural element. Bringing fresh blood and fresh eyeballs and new ideas is one of the biggest catalysts for anything. This blockchain is a social consensus, and bringing new social actors in fundamentally changes its nature. Yeah, the rule sets are based on math, but the math is a product or a downstream of the fact that we're people who run nodes. And when those people change, the way the Bitcoin network works will also change. And so I think this is exciting. If there's anything I'm bullish on, it's human ingenuity and human innovation. So the more humans who look at Bitcoin, I think the more interesting things we're going to do with it.
Yeah, and with the convergence of other blockchain communities moving over to Bitcoin, we saw them go through their own toolkit from their own blockchain, right? BRC20, Bitmap, Metaverse, on-chain art, all these things you're seeing just kind of get cycled through from Solana, Ethereum. I think the Bitcoin SV people came in, right? And they're the ones that actually provided the infrastructure because they had the most experience with
UTXO
management.
It's a permissionless network. It's no secret that I don't like Bitcoin SV, but the thing is, they're building cool shit, and Bitcoin's permissionless. That's a power of it. That is, I can't stop them from doing it. So this is one of the qualities I like about Bitcoin, is that it forces us to all use the same thing, and we can squabble over it. The maxis can hate the anti-maxis, can hate the ETH people, can hate the Solana people, but like the block contains everybody's transactions, and there's nothing you can do about that.
Yeah, that cultural convergence I find to be the most fascinating is coming from the historical NFT community. You see a lot of these trends kind of pop up and then, dissimulate, and then they come back, and then they have some trend and no traction. It's funny because when you look through like the history of Bitcoin, a lot of the firsts in the crypto industry was on Bitcoin. Bitcoin had the first NFT marketplace with Ascribe. It had Counterparty with fungible tokens. It also had Mastercoin. Like, it just goes on and on and on. When Ethereum thinks they're first, it's generally the primitive version popped up on Bitcoin in some sense. I think it's just in those earlier days, it was a Bitcoin only culture. They didn't have any ideas from these other chains because they associated anything being built on a different chain as being inferior, and that the principles couldn't be taken over. But now, because of that cultural convergence, they've kind of just kicked the door down with the Trojan horse coming inside of saying, hey, we're building on these ideas no matter what. And even if you hate us, we're still going to be here.
Both camps are sending Trojan horses into each other's camps right now. Because like, look at like the NFT market has, just compressed. It's been miserable for the past year, and it only gets worse. The whole DeGods thing, it sucked all the air out of the room. And this past week, and it's just kind of hit after hit after hit. So like the world of the NFT folks are, it's broadly understood to be a cultural movement. But, when you lose all this money, you tend to get disillusioned and kind of angry. And sometimes it drives you to look at Bitcoin. And that's where a lot of the Bitcoin maximalists come from these days. The ones who are the heroes and the most outspoken ones a lot of them lost their shirt in 2018. And I think that kind of drove them to like kind of focus and narrow in on just Bitcoin. And some of it's turned into kind of a monstrous attitude, towards newcomers. But, that kind of effect and the cyclicality of crypto drives people to Bitcoin. But in the same way, you have this ebullient optimism and like move fast and break things, which wants to come in and build shit on Bitcoin. And it's forcing the Bitcoiners to have to pivot. A lot of them have been kind of stuck in the mud for a long time, saying, we can't do anything. We can only scale on Lightning, and we can only do podcasts, and you have to say these 5 words. And these people are coming in saying, well, we have tons of money. We're going to build a lot of cool shit, and we're going to build it fast. Half of it's going to be absolute dog shit, but we're going to build a lot of things. And the Bitcoin maximalists are like kind of a lot of them are coming to terms with the fact that, well, you could compromise some of your core talking points. So maybe you might actually just grow. You might just get better at onboarding people to Bitcoin. You might learn a few things. And I mean, look, capital's coming to Bitcoin. Capital has been kind of stagnant deploying into Bitcoin for a long time. It's been a fraction of what it's been for Web3. And just in people investing in Bitcoin products and Bitcoin tooling is bullish, even if I don't think it's super well aligned in some cases. It's just more activity, more people, more ideas. And some of those ideas are going to be incredibly, incredibly effective. Because, 100 million people, 200 million people own Bitcoin? That's not 5 billion people. 5 billion people need to own some Bitcoin.
Yeah, we'll get there eventually. One of the most eye-opening, comments from a typical or traditional Bitcoin maximalist I actually got from your show, which was when Matt Odell had on Russell Kung, and he basically, I was surprised too, because I've been listening to their show since 2017. Of him saying that, there's probably a lot of possibilities that haven't been explored for inscriptions. And it seems like he's coming down to, just the immutable ledger of just storing different types of documents on there. I always thought when I first came to Ordinals, my favorite component was outside of the sat tracking, which Adam Leo and I had talked with Casey about back in August of 2022, was using Bitcoin for whistleblowers to kind of store these very important types of documents. To me, it takes away the speculation from it, right? Which of course speculation generally drives capital and interest and stuff. But that is more like a piece for leaving your legacy there, which I think is yet to be unexplored. And if I wasn't working on Emblem, that would probably be one of the things I'd be working on, is finding some sort of document portal.
It's funny you mention this because Matt's downstairs right now. He owns a place. I had this exact conversation with him yesterday. The exact same one rehashed that I mentioned in the Russell Okung show, which is, I think this is a very compelling perspective to have, which is, okay, so you can disagree with the ownership of inscriptions component. You don't attribute ownership to ordinal theory, you don't ordinal in the inscription, but it is very powerful to be able to put information on Bitcoin and to have that be a mechanism for uncensorability. And Matt has said, he thinks that's very interesting. And I think that's true. Who's to say whether or not we'll be trading NFTs on Bitcoin in 5 years? I think we'll still have some activity at the very least. But I mean, the cat's out of the bag. Pandora's box is opened. You can put information on Bitcoin and people want to do it. And some of that information, I think because Bitcoin's natural incentive and Bitcoin block space price discovery and uptrend, stuff that's not valuable is eventually going to be priced out. And you're going to have to, if you want to put something on Bitcoin, you're going to have to want to put it there. And so I think that naturally allows us to, over the next decade, really figure out what is valuable to people in humanity. Maybe we don't put monkey JPEGs, but still, monkey JPEGs are still valuable to a lot of people. You cannot deny this. It just might be a much more compromising price discovery for them, in that you got to pay the price. It's, you can't get around it. So that's what I get excited for. Part of the reason I'm here here in Nashville is to talk with really technically minded Bitcoiners who are uncompromising in their views, because I think there's a lot to be learned from these people who have studied this network for a decade. And with that, I can go and I can make better decisions about how to build OrdinalHub product stuff, and some cool new stuff we're coming out with in the next week or so, probably by the time this actually airs. So I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, we're going to dive into it in a second. I do want to break down kind of the premise behind, Matt's, I guess in that conversation with Russell, he says the main issue that he has with ordinals is that he doesn't believe that the ownership transfer is right, because he doesn't ascribe to ordinal theory because it's technically not built into the code. It's operated basically off of Casey's handbook, well, then you can build from there. So he's basically just saying the idea that once you put data onto Bitcoin, it's there for everyone to see. There's no ownership transfer. But as you work at OrdinalHub, also Luxor, which is a mining company, that kind of idea where it's built on a theory. Yes, the data is going into Bitcoin, but the ownership is using theory that isn't hard coded into that. Is that a concern for any of like the mining pools or mining companies that maybe causes some sort of contention for them to maybe not enter the space?
Yes and no. I think the incentives become overwhelmingly pro inscription and pro ordinals. There are some challenges because people talk about Bitcoin fungibility. It means that it's not easy to run a Bitcoin mining pool. It's very complex. And there's a lot of rule sets, which are just like, there's like no playbook for how to build a mining pool. And so there's a lot that you just kind of have to figure out for yourself. And so ordinals, the industry has chugged along for so long and been like, okay, well, we're just gonna take the expensive transactions first, and nothing really interesting is happening on in the mem pool and whatever. But now just shit is flying everywhere. And there's like so many new interesting things. And so Bitcoin mining and Bitcoin mining pool operation is a race to zero margin. It is always going to compress down to zero. So you have to continually find edges and you have to adapt. So this is one of those cases where there is huge opportunity for innovation across the whole stack. And that's where I fit in. OrdinalHub is this retail-focused product kind of within Luxor. But we also build a lot of tooling. We kind of act like an R&D squad within Luxor about like, how do these fit into our product stack? Is there like a business development component to Bitcoin mining pool operation? Like typically we just pull the transactions which are profitable. But like, what if like we could go out and procure profitable transactions from people, a big wizard, perhaps Bitcoin Magazine? This becomes a lot more interesting whenever you're imagining, what if Fidelity wants to buy like 100 blocks for something they want to put? Maybe they want to settle the user accounts in a specific way. That gets really interesting because that might add a lot more financial complexity and dynamism to this business. And so that's where once you get off the treadmill of Bitcoin mining, it's really hard to get back on. And so this is one where you just have to keep increasing the speed, adding more creative people who can compete differently. And this is where the business model changes. Bitcoin block production got super interesting in the past 6 months. And so if you are like me and a huge nerd about like why a transaction looks the way it does and why it got into a block and how we could compete to make that better and how we could acquire more of those transaction fees, then like, this is so interesting. And so Bitcoin miners, it's funny, I think the Bitcoin maximalists didn't like it initially. Bitcoin miners are kind of weirdos. Bitcoin miners tend to be way more like capitalist and money driven than idealistic. Many of us are idealistic, but like fees were like $52 million in aggregate fee revenue additional to miners in the past 6 months. We'll take it. We've been getting kicked in the teeth for so long. So like another $50 million, we will gladly welcome that. The problem is that the Bitcoin miners, like they're energy guys, they're infrastructure guys. They don't have MetaMask. They've never owned an NFT. They don't really look at mempool.space. These are different sides of the brain. And so Luxor kind of comes in and we kind of marry them and we say, we can build products and we can build primitives. And we have OrdinalHub, which is this kind of catch-all with a bunch of spokes coming out of it. And some of those are products nobody sees. Some of those are tools we use internally. Sometimes we'll work on a project or two, which will spin out and people will realize that was us. But yeah, it's just really cool stuff, man.
Yeah, when Luxor Mining acquired OrdinalHub, I think that had to be probably within the first few weeks of Ordinals really exploding.
It was in February.
It was so fast. It really... At the time, it didn't really make sense to me. I was like, mining, ordinals, yeah, where's kind of that, I don't know where that crossroad is. But now, looking at it retrospectively, 6 months later, you kind of see it as, Bitcoin and mining, it's this very, it's very analytically driven. It's all about numbers, bottom line, where ordinals is kind of this social layer where it's very similar to NFTs. And I compare this to like NFTs and DeFi on ETH, where NFTs is where all the attention, that's the attention economy. economy. That's where you get all the views. And then DeFi is kind of where all the money's made and all the bots are kind of battling each other. On Bitcoin, it's kind of the same. You have the Bitcoin miners, which would be, kind of the DeFi kind of comparison. And then Ordinals, it's bringing, the OrdinalHub is bringing all the attention to Luxor Mining, which is where Luxor ended up being, the one who ran the 4 megabyte Taproot Wizard, also helped Frank with the DGods mint. And I think there's been a handful of different companies or products or projects that you've helped mine that need some sort of like specificity. But where do you come in at all this? Like, were you the creator of OrdinalHub? How did you enter? Did you were you brought on by Nick? What is that story of where you became part of the person running OrdinalHub?
So I'm sitting there deputizing moderators for the Ordinals Discord. It's chaotic. It's fucking chaos.
The official Ordinals Discord.
Yeah, the official, well, it's the closest thing, the Ordicord, it's the closest thing to official. Casey just said, Charlie, can you run it? So I ran it. And kind of to keep track of all the projects, I saw that my buddy, Jameson, who created OrdinalHub, Jameson was like, I just need help like building this to like people have like a landing site. So I was like, oh yeah, sure, I'll help you build it. And I just kind of kept building it. And then I spent, April kind of waffling on, well, what do I want to do? Do I want to go deploy more Bitcoin mines, or do I want to have a career evolution where it's mining, but really it's more like software tech, business development, culture focused. So that is where I am. OrdinalHub is an aggregator, tracker, kind of all things ecosystem focused, but it really acts as kind of this broad funnel for us to deliver a lot of like what are like ecosystem primitives. We built our own Ordinals client from the ground up. We call it Gourd. It's written in a different language. We have, by the time this launches, we will have built an entire internal inscription service, which will probably be productized in the near future. We'll productize it internally with a new thing we're going to launch in the next week. And these are kind of primitives. And there's a lot of other things. Most major projects which have launched in the past 2 months, we have had a hand in. I won't say the well-known ones, just because I'll let them say if we're affiliated, but either we brokered sats, we did consulting, we did the inscribing ourselves, whatever. So we are it feels a little bit like a mafia in that we're like, between me, Cypher, Nick, and the kind of anybody on Luxor who's tapped to do Ordinals related stuff, we kind of hit and interact with most stuff in the space. And yeah, I don't think it's entirely clear how Ordinals and inscriptions will evolve. I don't know how the ecosystem will look. We're just building all the building blocks so that we can continue to morph this into like a really compelling product. Yeah, that's me.
There you are.
Influencer. Yeah. And yeah, so that's our thing. I do a lot of, I organize a Bitcoin meetup, and this is my world. I'm the spaces. So, I mean, as far as like how OrdinalHub works, we have Jameson who runs it. He's the guy. Cypher, who is a full stack developer, probably more knowledgeable about Bitcoin than anyone else I know. And then me, I'm kind of all things public facing. I talk to people, strategy, business development. I'm probably the person you DM when you talk about OrdinalHub. And then we opportunistically pull other like Luxor engineers, front end guys occasionally. But yeah, OrdinalHub's a small team within a 60-person company.
Ooh, man. Yeah.
And Luxor has a bunch of product lines. We don't have to go into those, but pretty much anything that involves mining, we have a hand in. And in fact, we've probably like bootstrapped the business from zero. We kind of wrote the book on market research. We kind of wrote the book on ASIC trading desk. We pretty much wrote the book on novel pool, like building a pool as a service. So all of these products that we do, just like this is kind of the first time it's ever been done. OrdinalHub is just the next iteration of that.
You guys have really crushed it. This dashboard is my favorite. This is the one that I generally use. When I'm price tracking. Yeah. Cause especially people don't realize you could probably click down on this and see some nice charts to go along with everything with OMB, which unsurprisingly OMB, I believe, is tagging Luxor in a handful of their cryptic tweets, which they typically do.
I want to let ZK give the official information on it, but here's my view. As you're familiar, like NFT treasuries and projects, like they kind of fumble around with like, what do you do with your treasury? Do you buy your asset back? Do you deploy it to some DeFi thing? Like, do you pay founders? What do you do? I think it's really obvious and should be convention for a lot of these projects to be able to deploy this into actual infrastructure within crypto, specifically Bitcoin mining. I think you think of it as like a cash flow generating position where it's tied to the real world. You have less exposure to some kind of DeFi schema and more like you got real world assets. So I think I would like to see more projects do that. And I'll let ZK talk about or say what he wants to about that when he's ready. But I think you'll be seeing some more stuff beyond just cryptic tweets soon.
They raised, I don't know, $5, $6, $7 million or something. So they've got a war chest to play around with. So as you've gone and you've built this, you guys have, again, an interesting perspective because as you're mining this, you can kind of see what type of sats that you're going to get in terms of you have, I would say, competitive advantage when it comes to rare sats and sat tracking. I remember back in February, I tweeted, and this goes back to, my kind of like history buff kind of knowledge. I was like, I would not be surprised if eventually somebody's going to create a sat panning service and just start going through and, separating these rare sats and beginning to, sell them off in different packages. And now we're starting to kind of see that, not just through OrdinalHub, but through a variety of services from, I guess, just from the internal perspective. What is the process like for, extracting or panning for these different types of rare sats? Is it like, I imagine it's like a war room inside of an NFL draft room where there's just a bunch of lines and numbers and names of how to sort this type of stuff. Is it complicated to do? And what is kind of the strategy behind that from a commercial perspective?
We could talk about this for like 1 minute or like 30 minutes. But so there's a few different components. One, you have to know which Satoshis you want. That's a whole thing. And like, what's the cost? What's your cost basis to acquire those? Because if you have a whole Bitcoin, and we only want like 3 sats, it's going to cost you some fees to pull those out. So that becomes your kind of cost of acquisition. And then I also make this analogy. You have a lot of Bitcoin, 92% of Bitcoin supply has already existed, which has a bunch of Satoshis you want in it, and you will pan through that and search that. But then if there's a lot of Satoshis which have yet to be created, and so that's where the Bitcoin mining pools come in that as far as the raw to more rarity index is concerned, we produce the future inflow of uncommons. So we don't want to leave any of those things on the table. To integrate that into a business model gets really complicated. It's easy to do this on a kind of user level to say, hey, retail investors buy, sell sats marketplace. That's intuitive. It's technical because you have a Bitcoin wallet. You got to build software on top of the Bitcoin wallet, which is Ordinals aware. And some people are doing that. There's some really good builders. We still kind of do this manually. We're figuring out how we want to productize it. But I think there's real opportunity, though, in the fact that the majority of Bitcoin flows through the hands of institutions. And the one that's public is Hive Blockchain. They're a major public miner. They have one of the largest mining treasuries. We work with them very closely to go through their treasury, sell it, broker it for them. But like these people, it's like you got to take everything you knew about Bitcoin and turn it upside down. So all of like the institutional operating agreements are very difficult to work with. You can't just go and like split their 10,000 Bitcoin stack and like take these out. You got to work with their custody provider. And the way the Bitcoin flows through the system is as varied as there are institutional actors. So really there needs to be solutions for doing this in an automated, non-invasive way. And we have been working on this. That's probably all I'll say. And yeah, I think it's also great for us to just kind of let the market see what's valuable. I talk about this a lot. It's not super clear which sats are desirable. Like, yeah, I would bet that people will want to buy uncommons for a while, but like, what even is a valuable Satoshi? Does the market's desire to own different qualities of these, does that change how you build these products? So we like to not get too over our skis building a specific type of thing when we could build things which have much clearer long-term use case, like our own indexer from which we build a data product, and then we can build other things. So yeah, you can see Luxor, we have, a lot of different business lines, and a lot of people, if you're for NFT world, you're probably not familiar with this, but like the pool, the hash rate derivatives desk, the first derivatives product regulated regulated for hash rate in North America. That's a big tool. Market research, I'm going to hammer onto that because we have one of the best market research desks in the space. Team, yeah, we got 50, 60 people on there. I don't even know if I'm on here. No, I think I am. I don't think I have a picture on here yet. But like firmware, that's another big one. The stuff that the Bitcoin mining computers run to work more optimally. That's a big one. So we are kind of everything Bitcoin mining and Bitcoin mining tech. And it's really cool because all these people are really smart. You never want to be the smartest person in the room. And so I am rarely not the dumbest person in the room. So this is where I get really excited because there are some very brilliant people at this company.
Here it says Charlie's the Ordinal Strategy Lead. So here, let me propose then a strategy that I've always thought of. If I was a Bitcoin miner, I would create some sort of Ordinals future product to where you could basically sell, you could sell the future uncommons or rares or whatever rarity index is being mined or extracted, therefore, and sell it to potential buyers. Is this something that you guys have considered? And do you think there's a possibly large market behind that?
I think that makes a lot of sense. What I would say is I think that fits into a broader futures strategy overall for block production in general, because what about this? What if you have 10 Taproot wizards and you don't care when they go on Bitcoin? You just need them to go on Bitcoin over a certain time period at a certain fee rate. There are certain scenarios where it makes sense for you to just pay us X amount of dollars and we will deliver those to you in a block at some time. And that becomes a kind of OTC futures market. Now integrate that with like the uncommons and other SAT productions. So these things are interlinked and it gets really fascinating really quick when you talk about physical block space delivery instead of synthetic derivatives of block space in the form of hash price. So when you put things that aren't just Bitcoin on Bitcoin, shit gets really interesting. And there's very few people who are even positioned to be able to build on that.
Yeah, it's again, right. For me, it was like, it's such an easy layup. I mean, of course you have to think about the financial kind of product behind it, but right, a futures product where in the real world I think it was originally created for corn producers where they didn't want to have to deal with the fluctuating prices when winter comes around. It's the same idea here. That when the bull market comes, the sats per VBuy, it's going to increase drastically. Let's hope it maybe, depending on who you are, if you wanted to get over 500 sats per VBuy, which it did during the peak BRC20. But if you just need it mined, or inscribed, you don't want to have to deal with that volatility at a future date. You just kind of pay for it immediately.
Yeah, an example would be, so I don't know how closely you watch Bitcoin's blocks, but occasionally you'll see a block which has no transactions in it. It'll take the 6.25 Bitcoin block subsidy and there'll be no transactions. Why is that? It's not because the miners don't want transactions or don't want those fees. It's kind of really a technical limitation just due to like how what's called a block template header gets passed back and forth. But in such a high fee environment where the fees are now a more material part of the block reward and your revenue, you don't want to miss out on that extra. Like right now they're like 0.1 or 0.2 Bitcoin. That's still a lot. What if they're like 5 Bitcoin? That's well into the 6 figures that you'd be missing out if you had this technological inefficiency. So what if you could solve that tech inefficiency with a futures market where you just say, well, okay, the Taproot Wizard V2 doesn't need to go in a block today. It just needs to be in there sometime over the next month. And we know we're going to get what's called a stale block or an empty block over the next month. We just say, we're going to keep that on the back burner and just make sure that instead of producing a block that's worth 0, we'll just produce a block that's worth something because we have a transaction we can put in there. And now it's a really simple concept, but it has deep implications for extrapolating that to what if there's hundreds of thousands of people wanting to put things like that on Bitcoin, and it becomes a whole separate market and affects the whole mining tech stack. So that's why I want to be close to what I call close to the production of blocks, because yeah, you can build that kind of stuff.
Yeah, block space is going to be one of the most commoditized and sought after financial products or financial instruments, I guess, here in the near future. I know A16Z has been kind of preaching this for a long time. I think they were talking about Ethereum and Bitcoin. Obviously now it's really just Bitcoin that's in that market for the majority of it.
And look at Ethereum. This is one of the great tragedies, I think, for Bitcoin maximalists is like we kind of closed our eyes and said, we're not going to look at Ethereum. But all of the innovation on MEV, maximum extractable value, techniques, a lot of the pitfalls of this reality have been mitigated on Ethereum. A lot of the innovation has happened on Ethereum. So I look at that and say, Ethereum has had a really interesting block space price discovery history. We need to learn from that. Now, it's going to look different on Bitcoin because our block time's longer. We're not a smart contract. We have different account-based, Ethereum's account-based, ours is UTXO-based. But like, we need to have our eyes up and look, because the people who built interesting things on ETH are gonna have really interesting insight to Bitcoin. So yeah, I look at that and I just think Bitcoin's the pristine block space. Other blockchains have valuable block space people want to pay for. You know, there's going to be metas and strategies which we can learn from each other. And so, yeah, it's the most fascinating time. The next 3 years are going to be mind blowing.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. We're seeing a ton of updates from recursion to reinscriptions to parent-child. I'm sure there's going to be some other aspects to it. But as you work for Luxor and you're pioneering with OrdinalHub, which is essentially kind of it's a social research and development kind of arm to it. So you have a ton of insight from all different, areas of it. Right now, Ordinals, I would say it's mostly borrowing innovation from Ethereum and some of the other blockchains outside of maybe just the inscription part, which now we're seeing e-scription too, right? That was kind of the ones where it's like, now they're kind of copying it, right? We have BRC20, which is, modeled after ERC20, a bitmap that's modeled after kind of like this metaverse idea. Do you think there will be a product that's introduced on Ordinals that is unique to just Ordinals, that isn't kind of this borrowed technology from some of these other blockchains?
100%, totally. I think, if you've been around for a few cycles, you understand that, cycle from cycle to cycle, things rhyme, but they don't really repeat. They're going to look very different. And bear markets are for destroying old models, maybe introducing some new primitives. And then as the market heats up, then you have like real product market fit develop. And I don't yet have a super clear idea of what ordinals and inscriptions will look like as far as it's vastly differentiated from ETH. I think it makes a lot of sense to copy the NFT meta right now. I mean, it looks almost the exact same, but what's going to interest me most is when I start seeing things which have no ETH analog on Bitcoin. When I see things which are like, oh, that's something that you either can't do or don't do on ETH with NFTs, that's when I'm like, this is a really interesting thing. Maybe we hard commit to that particular use case or product. I don't know what that is right now. I have some ideas. We're actually going to introduce one probably by the time this comes out, which is, I won't specifically say the product, but it's a thing which appeals to the left and right curve. So the left curve wants to point, click, buy. It's kind of a dumb, simple concept. You buy the thing, we inscribe it for you. Great. But underneath that is, I think, a very undiscussed mechanic of inscriptions, which is the enveloping mechanism by which the actual tap script outputs are pieced together. That is, an inscription is in the witness data, but it's really kind of broken up into a bunch of little pieces. And this is identified. And when we run indexers throughout Bitcoin, we see, here's the thing that says, thus begins the inscription. So we read all the pieced together data after that, but it's packaged in an envelope. And this envelope can be anything. It's called the ORD envelope. We use there's a 3 kind of ticker letter, a header at the top, which we call we're calling it a protocol identifier. But nobody's really talked about this because it's weird, it's kind of obscure, and it's like a weird Bitcoin mechanic. But if we say maybe different meta protocols use different envelopes, you can create different rule sets within there, and you can then index them more efficiently or more precisely. And I believe that introducing new concepts kind of kicks off innovation cycles. You saw the recursion innovation cycles. We're going to see a reinscription innovation cycle. We're going to see recursion and reinscription. I think we're going to see an enveloping innovation cycle. And I think enveloping actually is one of those things where it can operate separate to ordinal theory, because enveloping simply is a mechanism to put anything on Bitcoin. As like Matt Odell said, as we said at the top of the show, like that is a mechanism to put any just information on Bitcoin which does not necessarily have to have an owner or relate to ordinal theory. So this is a very simple, efficient way to put things in block space. And so I think the meta would be, as Bob Bodley from one of your previous episodes said, it is one of the best single pay, I don't know, what did he say? It was like one of the best like pay once, store forever mechanisms. Yep. An envelope is the actual mechanism by which that is stored. So it's a more pure kind of value of information discovery mechanism. And that to me is incredible, because imagine a future where you do have some kind of Arweave type storing service, but then for the real pristine information, Bitcoin becomes that consensus layer. And that is one of the new mechanics that I see that I don't see happening on other chains. Other chains don't prioritize absolute immutability, uncompromising immutability as much, and Bitcoin does. And that's a challenge, but it's also a strength. We haven't really talked about why it is a strength in this capacity, but it certainly appears to be. So if we introduce a, enveloping, maybe we can create more efficient BRC20 meta protocol standards. I don't like BRC20s, but it's a reality. I think you can improve them significantly with a dedicated envelope. I just want to imagine what other types of data-related protocols can emerge. What if you have an envelope and maybe not ordinal theory, but just some other thing? I don't know. So, iteratively, gradually, and then suddenly, and that's how we build.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at just the history of, meta protocols that have been built on Bitcoin, you have, at least that are NFT related, you have Counterparty, you have Ordinal Theory, and you have Stamps, but Stamps is leveraged using Counterparty. So I don't see a future where there's going to be more of them that are populated over time. And I'd like to just kind of finalize it, maybe the few of these last questions. You're not a big fan of BRC20. I do think most people are pretty firm on the idea that Bitcoin will host some sort of token protocol at some point in time. Right now, there's a competition there's BRC20, ORC20, there's, GBRC 721, all these different standards, but they're all using an indexer, right? Which is kind of the central aspect, which is basically create your own walled garden of rule sets and then hopefully have other people kind of adopt it. Do you think that's the right method to go through? Is it just because this is the primitive and this is the only option right now? And then also, do you think it's okay, either from a security model or maybe just personal perspective, to outsource some of these to other blockchains, for example, like Bob is trying to do with doing an on-chain indexer on ICP, or build a marketplace? Is that kind of a future of a multi-chain future is probably more sustainable than just these centralized indexers?
It's hard for me to say. I don't really see like the JSON meta protocol standard really making sense long term. I have a hard time imagining that works at a technological level for like a long period of time. But what Bitcoin will do is I also don't want to write all those off, because they bring tons of people in, and users kind of sometimes emergently discover like, oh, this actually works if we twist these knobs a bit. I do think we're headed to a period or an era of more cross-chain than ever. I don't know if that's what I think the end of the decade will look like, but I think we'll become more cross-chain over the next few years. I don't really have a long-term view about what I think that'll end up as. Bitcoin will price out the things which don't matter. And sometimes I've learned the things I think that don't matter actually do matter, because I told Casey I don't think inscriptions will ever take off. I think ordinals are cool. I told her, I was like, no, I mean, there'll be like a couple dozen of us, but no, this is like, I don't really see why this would be popular. So I've been wrong about that. So, maybe some of these, what I call dumb JSON protocols, will really stick long term. But what Bitcoin will do is it will it will act as a natural price discovery, and it'll kind of weed those things out which really don't have product market fit. And I think that's cool. There's a bit of humility and trust in that. And this is where I do kind of become maximalist, but I think more open-minded maximalist. I'm like, I have a little bit of faith that it's all going to be okay, but I need to participate in it. I need to interact and I need to build, because the best way to have Bitcoin is not just to DCA, but it's to use it. Your DCA becomes much more effective and strong when you are participating in a network. Maybe it's simple as just doing peer-to-peer exchanges in your local community, like we do in our local Bitcoin meetup, or if you're building complex Rube Goldberg machines of like DeFi 2.0 protocols on Bitcoin. All of those things are using it, because this network is meant to be used. It's not meant to just sit and stagnate. This is living, breathing, and are 14 years into the greatest experiment we've ever been a part of. And maybe it's Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. Maybe it's cross-chain. I don't know. I'm going to bet on Bitcoin, but I'm going to keep my eyes up. The whole reason I'm in Ordinals is because I have a curious mind. I can close with this. The same curious mind that brought me to Bitcoin, I try to maintain that like open thought, because if you stop learning and you stop like looking out, you're going to freeze in place, when that is the last thing you should do at this point in time in human history. So I try to be innovative. I try to learn. And I try to be humble and admit when I'm wrong about stuff. So because of that, I've found more excitement in Bitcoin than I've ever had. I understand it better. I have onboarded more people to it than my entire decade-long career. In the past 6 months, I helped more people install nodes in a weekend than I have in over a decade of advocating for Bitcoin. So if that's not a metric of success, then what is? Then yeah. So that's what I think. I'm optimistic. I'm excited to have this conversation in a year and have like more resolution and close some of these loops that we've opened.
Yeah, I think our curious minds is what got us into this space to begin with. We've both been here for a while, and the time when I got in 2016 or even before, there really wasn't information about anything, any of the blockchains anywhere. So you really had to go down the rabbit hole. But then once you become comfortable and you forget to go down those rabbit holes, and Ordinals has definitely kicked a lot of us down in even farther than we ever thought. And that's why we're still here having this conversation. So Charlie, appreciate you for sharing your time with us. This was awesome. I want you to get back in there and tell everyone here from Nashville that Ordinals are here to stay. And yes, it is a social theory, but we're all degenerates and we want to continually build on these social constructs.
Yep. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having this conversation, Jake. And I'll see you online in the metaverse.
Yeah, right. JakeXBT and CB Spears. We're going to be at the nearest spaces next to you. So everybody that was listening and watching, thank you. And we'll see you next time.